Because, the bottom line is that what we focus on a lot, what we talk about a lot, is the importance of understanding that what you take yourself to be, what you have been educated to believe that you are, is simply not true and is simply not real. In the Zen approach to things, what we focus on is the present moment. Right? Because the present moment is reality, it's now, it's not the future. And the understanding that we have about the present moment is that the present moment is real time, in the sense that within that moment is what we call the past and the future. But that is real time. The present moment's real time. And that in that now is where the existence is occurring. Our existence is occurring in the present moment. And so in that present moment is the existence of infinity, of eternity. It's beyond our comprehension. It's incomprehensible because we're so oriented to time that we can't think outside that box, right? So it's a whole different ball game, in terms of the focus of attention has to do with making a distinction between what's real and what's not real. And then living your life with a consistent awareness of that distinction, living your life with a consistent awareness that you are not the voice in your head, that you are not the physical body, that you're not the personality, and what you are is an experience you're having all the time. You can't not experience what you are. It's impossible. You can't. You're experiencing it all the time. Even when you're in the form of the personality, you are experiencing your true nature. How can that be so? It can be so because all there is consciousness. And even the experience of your identity as a personality is awareness being run through a system called the mind. But the reality of it, the life energy of it, the life force of it is real and is you and is being experienced all the time. Okay? So the idea that your personality is not a problem, it's not a bug, it's a feature. You have to be a personality to have a human life. Okay? That's not the problem. The problem isn't that you're in the form of a body or a personality. The problem is that you think you are the personality and the body. That's where it goes off the rails. And once it goes off the rails like that and you're living as something that you are not, you're in an unreal world. When you're living as something that you're not, you're living in an unreal world. And that unreal world could be accurately described as the mental state, the mental condition, the conditioning. You've been conditioned to live in a condition, and the condition is an unreal condition. It's a thought condition. It's an emotional state, right? It's an imagined condition. You have visions, don't you? You have memories. They're called visions. You have thoughts of apprehensive thoughts about the future. They're imaginations. None of it's real. None of that's real. And most human beings are living they're living their entire life in a dream. That's why you hear this in the teachings. The dream they're living in is unreal. Why is it unreal? Because it's just a mental state. That's all it is. It's just a mental state. And while you're busy allowing your attention to be completely taken, and while you're busy participating in that mental activity, your life is going by unlived. Your life is going by unlived. So you could accurately say that a human life for most human beings, right, is a state of being dead and then the body dies. It's a condition of being dead and then the body dies. Because the only activity that's going on for most human lives is in the mind, and it's not real. It's in the mind. And it's being projected. It's being projected. Yeah? What we see in the world, we interpret to be what the mind says it is. So, the only thing we're using the information about the world, right, is to run it through the mental system and turn it into interpretation. And that interpretation is a different interpretation for all of us. So now we have 8 billion interpretations. We have 8 billion worlds. People are living on one planet in 8 billion worlds. It's a miracle that we get along as well as we do. One of the things I thought about that I think is an interesting thing to consider, right, is when you look at it, right, given the condition that we are in, that most of us are in terms of the mental state and the fear condition and the confusion and the difficulty with being able to pay attention to anything for any length of time, all that stuff, given that condition that we're in, it's a miracle that we're able to drive our cars and not have the driving of cars produce more deaths and more injuries and more accidents, isn't it? It's a miracle that we can do that. It's a miracle. And the thing about that is that, okay, if that's the case, even though we're as crazy as we are, and even though our attention is being distracted as much as it is, and even though we're living in a dream most of the time, we're still able to drive cars and not kill each other, right? Well, maybe we're onto something there. If we could live our lives, our lives as least as effective as we drive our cars, we might be a lot happier. You see what I'm saying? It just goes to show that it is possible. It is possible to live your life in a way where you're paying attention to the mental activity consistently enough, right, that it doesn't take you out of the experience of being alive. And one of the things that I wanted to also mention here, because I was listening to one of the teachers, and it was the first time I heard a teacher emphasize this as much as this teacher did. And he's a very high teacher from a Dogen tradition. And he said one of the most important things that he talks to his students about is sleep. Sleep. Because one of the things that's important in order for us to experience a state of well-being is balance, right? And one of the most important areas of balance in our life is the balance between sleep and being awake. Physically, sleep and being awake. The body needs to be asleep, not just for the regeneration of cells and all that other jazz that goes on, all that miraculous stuff that goes on that we don't even know it's happening. Not just for that, but every night at sleep, part of a sleep, if you're experiencing a normal state of sleep, right, is that there is a portion of the night every night that you go into deep sleep, right? And deep sleep is where the whole system goes offline, right? You could say that deep sleep is like every night you die and then you are reborn again. That's what deep sleep is. You go offline. There's no dreaming happening. Everything is in a complete state of formlessness, you could say, formlessness. Deep sleep is like there is a time in deep sleep when the mental activity is not operational, and because that's the case, you're actually experiencing the natural state for a certain period of time in deep sleep. And because you have that experience every night, if you're getting the sleep that the body needs, right, it helps to balance out the insane portion of your life, which is when you're awake. Yeah.
But at the retreats, they deprive you of sleep.
Yeah, that's only for the use of the retreat. In a retreat, you're deprived of sleep because it's a way of weakening the personality, so that in your meditation practice on the retreat, you have a better shot at making contact with your true nature. But you will never hear any teacher in a retreat say, okay, now after the retreat, everybody, when you go home, only keep sleeping 4 hours a night. You'll never hear them say that. No. Now, other than a retreat, you should be trying to get a good night's sleep. And you should, if you're not sleeping well, you should deal with it. Don't just allow that to happen. If you're not sleeping, you should deal with it. Look at the information that's available on how you can get a better night's sleep. Obviously, one of the things that is a very critical aspect of getting a good night's sleep, right, is to wear the body out during the day. Make sure that you're getting sufficient amount of exercise, not too much sedentary activity, not too much sitting around, not too much laying around. You got to move. You got to keep moving in order to burn the energy up so the body's tired, and if the body's tired, it will naturally go to sleep. It's as simple as that. The energy that we're most interested in when it comes to meditation, it could be called the vital force. The chi is another word for it, right? It's the life energy. It's what leaves the body when you die. It's the life energy, right? And so the life energy is something that you can begin to experience. This is further down the road, as far as meditation is concerned. One of the things that's important for us to understand is that you've got to be patient, and you have to accept the fact that it's going to take time for meditation to start to produce the results that it's capable of producing. It's not going to happen overnight. You're in a maladaptive state, and your nervous system is in a dysfunctional state for years. And you think if you're just going to meditate for a little while, it's going to turn that around. No, it's going to take time, right? But if you stay the course, right? If you stay the course and you stay with the meditation practice, and the way you're practicing meditation is you're doing it correctly, and part of doing it correctly that's very important is to not be doing it in order to get a particular outcome. If you're meditating in order to get a particular outcome, you're not meditating. You're trying to control your mind, and that's not going to happen, right? So it really undercuts the whole purpose of doing meditation, right? The correct way to do meditation is to do meditation by focusing on the meditation itself. That's all. Of course, if you're meditating because you want to experience a more peaceful life, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're meditating because you want to be physically more healthy, nothing wrong with that. If you're meditating because you want to be able to function in your relationships better, nothing wrong with that, right? But if you're going to practice meditation in a way that it works, you have to leave that alone, and then when you sit, you simply focus on the breath. You simply focus on the breath. You just stay present to what's happening in the present moment, right? That's the practice of meditation. And by focusing on the breath consistently, away from the mental activity, the mind will begin to calm down. The biggest barrier to your experiencing well-being is mental activity. The biggest barrier to experiencing a natural state is thinking. Our Zen teacher says that the gates to the kingdom of heaven are the barrier to the kingdom of heaven is the thought process. It's the thought process. So you can't eliminate thinking, but you can eliminate the way you relate to it. You can change the way you relate to it. You can't eliminate mental activity, but you can change the way you relate to it. Right? You can stop identifying with it, in other words, right? And that's not something that is easily done, right? Because we are enculturated and we're indoctrinated and educated to depend on it, aren't we? Yeah, we learn very early on in life to depend on thinking, And so here we are, we've been living our life depending on thinking. That dependence on thinking has turned into a neurotic process that's driving us crazy and killing us. That dependency on thinking has turned into a neurotic process that's driving us crazy and killing us. So now we have to reverse it. We have to reverse engineer the whole thing, right? And understand, that while thinking is a necessary aspect of living a human life, right? You don't have to be the thinking in order to use thinking. You don't have to identify with the thought activity in order to use the thought process, right? And if you can disidentify with it by being aware of it and looking at it and seeing that this voice in your head is not you, it's a system that's running a program, and the voice is the voice of the system that's running the program. And what it's talking to you about, what it's telling you, what the thoughts are that are being fed to you, right, are thoughts that are designed for the survival of the physical body, and they're designed for the survival of the personality. The aspect of it that has to do with the survival of the physical body is fine. We don't need to do anything about that. We need that, right? But that's only a relatively small portion of the process of this program. A very large part of the process of this program is all the thinking and all the feeling and all the behaving that's about survival of your personality, survival of your person, survival of the self-concept, survival of what you take yourself to be. And if you understand the teaching and you understand the most fundamental aspect of the teaching, the most fundamental aspect of the teaching is that what you take yourself to be is not real. You are not what you think you are. That's the most fundamental aspect of the teaching. That's the takeoff place. That's the beginning of the practice. That's the beginning of the understanding that I'm not who I thought I was. Okay, I'm not who I thought I was. Well, who am I then? As Ramana Maharshi said, self-inquiry, its most powerful way of experiencing your true nature is to start asking the question, for Christ's sake. Who am I? Right? In order to start asking the question, you have to allow yourself to discover that you don't know what you are. That's a pretty profound discovery, that you don't know what you are, right? And having discovered that you don't know what you are, because you're not the personality and you're not the body, so then what? Having discovered that, if you're willing to go into this process of self-inquiry, where you're asking the question, I was listening to Paul Hederman talk about this, when you're asking the question, who am I? You're not asking that question to get the answer. You're asking that question to have the question be a process within which you're looking. It's the looking that's the powerful thing, not getting the answer, right? So you're asking the question to do the looking. And when you do the looking, if you do the looking consistently, right, what will happen, right, is you'll have an experience of who you are, and the one who is asking the question will disappear. Right? So you have both sides of it get handled, right? Who you think you are, who is asking the question, and the answer to the question, which is an experience of your true nature, right? Has the question get answered experientially, right? And disappears the questioner at the same time. And then there's a non-dual experience. Yeah? Then you are in harmony because there is no separation anymore. And if there's no separation anymore, then there is no one to be at the effect of what's happening. There's no one to be hurt. There's no one to be at the effect of life. And when you start to experience yourself that way, where there's no one to be hurt, there's no one to be affected by life, right? Your relationships will start to work. Because when somebody that you're living with or married to, or your parents or your children say or do things that cause you to experience an upset, you understand that that upset is happening in your mind in relationship to an imaginary person that you're not. That upset's occurring in your mind in relationship to an imaginary person that's not real. And because you now know that, you can be with that mental activity and not identify with it, right? So you stop acting as if people are hurting you and you have to protect yourself and you have to attack. It takes you out of the fight or flight mode. You can see that your mind may still be playing the fight or flight programming, but you're not your mind now, so you're not acting that out anymore. That'll save you a lot of trouble in terms of lawyers, divorces, hating your children, hating your spouse, hating your parents, hating yourself for hating them, the whole thing. It's all a neurotic, miserable storm. Zen is nothing more than looking and seeing what's so. That's all it is. It's just looking and seeing what's so. And the thing that's important about this whole business of letting things be as it is, right? You have to be clear that your personality cannot do that. So your personality can. So as long as you're identified with your mind, you can't do that. You have to be able to see. You have to be able to let your mind be the way it is too. Right? Let everything be the way it is, without resistance. That's harmony. That's natural. That's workable. And that's natural, So what we're doing in meditation is we're simply practicing not being unnatural. We're practicing not being unreal so that we can begin to experience what it's like to be alive. You know? Being alive itself is fulfilling without getting into the details. Do you understand? That's the source of real happiness and fulfillment, is experiencing your existence. Being alive itself is the source of well-being and happiness, not the content, not what's happening. What's happening will always be changing. What's happening will always be unstable, right? But the experience of being alive is consistent. It's called consciousness. That's the source of well-being. That's the source of fulfillment. That's the possibility that's always available to us if we can practice our way out of being in a state of mind all the time.